What's fascinating about this case is in 2006, Thiel is outed by Gawker as gay. And it wasn't that he was like ashamed of being gay, he just thought like, this is my business and I don't think people should talk about it. And so they write this thing, and then he sort of goes to all his friends and says like, what can I do about this? And they said, the media is broken, like you just have to sort of take it. And he said, I don't think he said this, but I think his reaction was like, what did I make all this money for if I just have to sit around and take things that I don't like? And so he spends the next like 5 years just thinking about, he's just like stewing on his revenge. Like he's like the Count of Monte Cristo in his prison cell. He's like, how am I gonna get even with these people? So he ends up coming up with this strategy. He's going to sort of fund lawsuits against him. And so he starts approaching people secretly that maybe had been even more egregiously, sort of harmed by the site. And as he's doing this, Gawker runs a clip of a stolen sex tape of Hulk Hogan having sex with his best friend's wife. Yep. So it gets weirder from there. So his best friend was named Bubba the Love Sponge. Legally, that's his actual name. He's a Florida DJ. And what had happened is Bubba the Love Sponge and his wife had an open relationship. Terry was their best friend. They invited him into their thing. They just didn't.
As you do in these situations.
Of course, totally. Who hasn't had a professional? They just neglected to tell Terry that the strings attached to this offer was that they were secretly filming the encounter.
Wow.
And so the encounter was filmed, put on a DVD, and locked in Bubba the Love Sponge's desk until a rival Florida DJ decides to break into it to find embarrassing information on the guy whose slot he wants to steal. Weirder than that, so then he basically tries to extort them. He actually uses the same lawyer that Stormy Daniels used. And so, anyways, there's this FBI sting, there's all this stuff, but basically what ends up happening is Gawker gets a hold of the tape and they publish it. And so Thiel knows that, Thiel's instinct is that although there's free speech, perhaps the line is you can't run, stolen footage of two consenting adults. They end up suing in federal court, that gets tossed, but then it gets relegated to a Florida court. This whole lawsuit, Thiel's backing it secretly the whole time. Gawker refuses to settle the case, basically thinks like, we have more money than Hulk Hogan, so of course we'll just drag this on until eventually drops the case. Well, that doesn't happen because he has a blank check from Peter Thiel. So they're sort of confidently, almost, you could say egotistically, assuming they have the leverage in this thing all the way up until trial. And then it almost like catches them by surprise that it goes to trial. One of the most interesting exchanges, there's two, so this is sort of how Thiel's mind works. The first, has anyone here been deposed in a lawsuit? So the first question they ask you when you're deposed in a lawsuit, this is like a super controversial media brand, they've tangled with all sorts of celebrities. The first question you're asked in the deposition is, have you ever been deposed before? And so Thiel sort of, hoping he has a good try. When they sit down and they watch the deposition videos of Gawker's CEO, Gawker's strategy officer, Gawker's all the people, they all say no, they've never been deposed before. And he realizes, this is basically a paper tiger. They've just been bluffing that no one would ever actually sue and fight a media outlet in court, right? And so Gawker just assumed this would go away like all the other cases. And sort of just assumed eventually Hulk Hogan would run out of money, and that just never seemed to happen. And so there's this wrestling term, kayfabe, and so wrestling is kayfabe. It's the outcome, the what they're doing is real, but the outcome is always scripted, right? So the term is that it's kayfabe. This is a sort of fake version of reality. But sometimes wrestling matches break out into what's called a shoot. And a shoot, like SHOOT, that's when the people actually start fighting each other. Like when you're like fighting with a friend and then somebody hits someone and then suddenly it becomes a real fight. And so Thiel, on the eve of trial, he through an intermediary, because Hulk never knew that Thiel existed, he said, Gawker thinks this is kayfabe, but it's actually a shoot. And so they go into court and Gawker just gets destroyed. I mean, like, there's this sort of Brooklyn, or not Brooklyn, because the people live in Brooklyn, but this Manhattan-based media company is being judged by a jury of 6 people from Pinellas County, Florida, and the judge from the judge was the lawyer in the Terry Schiavo case. So it's like, could not have been a more sort of like red state, blue state kind of thing. Anyways, $150 million verdict essentially bankrupts Gawker. But the really interesting part about it is there's a New York Times article you can read shortly after the verdict. And it's basically like the New York Times legal attorney, a legal expert, someone else. There's 3 attorneys. 2 of the 3 go, the precedent of this case is basically that media outlets can't run stolen sex tapes. Gawker deserved what happened to them. Like, don't do things like this. And so it's sort of seen as a very limited scope. That it's sort of essentially not a threat against free speech and perhaps kind of a victory for like common sense. Well, a month later, Thiel, because he told too many people about his secret conspiracy, is eventually revealed. And like within days, the Times has run like a half dozen pieces about how this is the worst thing that ever happened, and the world is going to come to an end, and now billionaires have destroyed the First Amendment, blah blah blah. So I think the fundamental premise of that documentary is that like this is a massive blow against free speech, and it's alarming. I actually think an environment in which you can be publicly humiliated by a media outlet, and because they have more money than you, they can just expect to bully you in court and eventually drain your finances to zero until you give up and ask for forgiveness, is probably a worse First Amendment environment than the one where, like to me what's so fascinating about the case is it's complicated. It's like it's this question: who is the bully? Like, who is the big guy? Is it the billionaire? Is it the media outlet? But I think what's so interesting about it is that to me, it's more of an indictment of how broken our legal system is, which is that it took $20 million, each side spent $10+ million to determine, and it had to be decided in a Florida courtroom by a civil jury, whether media outlets should run stolen sex tapes of people who don't want them to be run. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of precedent in it, but I think it's weirdly not what people think it was. Although the wrinkle is that it was sort of watching that trial and the reaction of it that gives Thiel the sense that Trump can win, and partly is why he ends up at sort of Trump's lowest point, making a large campaign donation and sort of, I wouldn't say responsible for Trump's victory, but is a part of it is partly what he learned there about this sort of like elite common man antagonism that we're, I think, still wrestling to come to terms with.